Today, we will be discussing communication for clarity. Our presenter today is Steve Wiley. He is president of CEEK and author of Navigate Chaos, a #1 bestseller on Amazon, who was on a personal mission to rid the world of zombies in the workplace. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Steve.
All right, thank you very much, Maggie. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate all of you joining me today. If you had been with us the past few weeks, we have talked about the foundation of an intentional values-based culture. We started with our values and bringing clarity to what those are. And we talked about really the key is minimizing the degree of hypocrisy, which destroys engagement, the degree where your professed behaviors are inconsistent with your core values. So in week 2, we talked about really defining the standards by which you assess your values in terms of the behaviors. Last week, we dove into rituals, which become a very prescribed and intentional application of the values and behaviors. That, in and of itself, forms the foundation of your intentional values-based culture. And so today, and in the 3 weeks that follow, we're gonna really dive into how do you apply that? How do you apply that? And we're gonna start with communications, communicating for clarity. So as we typically do, I'd love to just hear from some of you if you have any thoughts in response to the following question. How does your organization communicate expectations relative to your values, to your culture? What do you guys do? I mean, we often hear stories of the values on the wall, the poster. Are there any things, or maybe you don't? Would love to just, if you want to type in a response in chat or just think about it on your own regard here, but what do you do to communicate expectations about culture, about values? Or do you just say, these are it, and there is no communication? So if anybody wants to share, welcome, provide some feedback in the chat here. And while we're doing that, yeah, I see we have check-ins and reminder conversations about our culture and values. There's many different ways that people communicate. And one of the things that we're gonna dive into today just become, really, it's about setting the expectations. It's about providing the language by which we can hold ourselves accountable to an intentional culture. And so with that in mind, that brings us back to this objective that we have today. And really, I just don't wanna lose sight of this notion that this intentional culture plan gives you a common language for accountability. Defining those values and those standards and those rituals, it allows us to hold each other accountable, to have the difficult conversations. It gives us that language. First and foremost, that's really the biggest part of all of this. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of accountability, but we'll also share with you various mechanisms. And those can be relative to a recurring meeting schedule, as well as different products that you might produce that help communicate the values and the culture and how that differentiates your organization. So we'll share some creative ideas in that regard. And then lastly, really, again, this is more of a challenge than an objective, but challenge you to think in terms of your values and your culture. And in the midst of a global pandemic and the impact on your organization, your team, your family, whatever the case may be, how does that change, or how does that guide or serve as a filter for influencing the communications that you have within your organization? Now, I'm not going to go into great detail here on the other side, but we've talked about this. We're following this year methodology. I've mentioned this on each of these, where today is about gathering some information. We'll give you the landing page. You can go out and get access to additional materials that will augment what we're talking about, what we're learning today. But more importantly, on that landing page, we give you an activity sheet, which gives you some guidance to really develop and implement a communication plan, which is what we're talking about today, and how to do this in a way that doesn't overcomplicate. And then lastly, I'll share my contact information again and welcome any feedback, questions. Happy to have a conversation with anyone if you have anything that I can respond to in that regard. So as a reminder, This is our methodology. This is our approach. When you're developing an intentional culture plan, most organizations have a mission and vision. Again, we talked about this in week 1. It really gives you your compelling purpose. And you shouldn't just say, well, that's the bigger organization. It's important to embrace the mission and vision of the organization you belong to. But again, I don't care if you lead a team of 10 or a family or just an individual. Define, have a compelling purpose. Then you've got a core set of values. Again, most organizations define this, but you can adopt this and embrace a larger organization's values, and you can enhance that and augment that. And we talked about differentiating right to play versus core versus aspirational values. But really the key here in minimizing that hypocrisy is defining what are the standards by which you assess those values. And that's defined in the behaviors that reinforce those values. Last week, we talked about a very prescribed rituals becomes a prescribed application of those values and behaviors. That forms the foundation of intentional values-based culture. You don't need to do more than that. That will give you what you need. Now, there are other aspects that we embrace certain things, like we define a set of beliefs. You'll see certain organizations have a set of beliefs. If you can write your beliefs out and say, yeah, I know who that organization is simply by what they believe, that's compelling as well. There are other things like taglines. But if you simply define the values, the behaviors, and rituals, that gives you your foundation. And then it's all about this bottom layer, applying it. How do you hire for the right fit? How do you train, communicate, and coach this into the organization? And then the last week, we're going to talk about how do you measure and align this to business results, which is ultimately what this should be about. So again, today we're focused on communicating for clarity, bringing accountability. In that regard, I mentioned from the start, one of the biggest things is just establishing a language to have conversations, to hold each other accountable. What you see on the screen here is a picture of this. This is our corporate credo card. We develop these. When we work with organizations on intentional culture plans, we develop them for our clients. It is a daily reminder. On the back of that card, we've got our mission, our vision, our values. You open it up, you can see we've got our right to play values. You can see it on the screen. This is our daily reminder. Anytime we have decisions that are difficult that we need to make, I will pull this out of my pocket and I say, what is it that our values tell us? How should I leverage that in regard to the decisions that we make? We've got our core values in here with each of the behaviors, just a summary statement of the behaviors with a tagline for each of those core values. That we be intentional about our passion. We value people over profit. We're going to be creative. We're going to seek a better way. Every one of us carries this with us. We carry it with us. This is our conversation starter. This is our language. I say this is what should replace the poster on the wall. This is what people have with them every single day. And guess what? This doesn't just serve as an internal communications device for our staff. I can't remember the last time I went and gave a corporate PowerPoint presentation. Anytime I meet with someone, they want to learn about CEEK and who we are, I show them this. I talk about what we do in terms of our mission and our vision, but really what differentiates us is the how we do it. And this is my commitment to you as a potential client, as a potential employee. This is how we're going to behave. And 9 times out of 10, I share that information. People respond, say, that is so cool. Can I have a copy? Absolutely. I give it to them. That is what really differentiates us as an organization. And if you develop your intentional culture plan, I recommend, whether you call it a credo card or something else, something that everybody can carry with them, to have that language, to have conversations. And we'll tell you how that applies as we go forward. But that's a signature product, something that we develop, we recommend for all organizations to carry with them. We'll come back to some of those different products, but again, we have an approach, we have a methodology. On this slide, I don't go into the details of what we do to develop our communication plan when it comes to culture. You'll see the last item on example outputs is communication plan, social media plan. Ultimately, you go out to our landing page, we will give you some guidance as far as the approach. How can you do this without overcomplicating it? And really, it's just reviewing What are you currently doing? So I asked that question from the beginning. How are you currently communicating the values and culture? And what's your intended message? Who's your audience? So it's kind of review and assess, who is your audience? Well, you're really talking about your colleagues, you're talking about your clients, but you're also talking about potential colleagues, potential employees, and potential clients. And what is the message that you're trying to get across relative to your culture? And so you start with reviewing and assessing what you're doing today, what you want to communicate and share, and what are those gaps. And out on the landing page, you'll get some guidance about how to do that. And then you develop a communication plan. And I'm going to show you our communication plan. You implement that plan. You can see some of the example outputs that we recommend. You don't have to do all of these. I highly recommend you do the Credo card. And there's some others in here that I highly recommend. You can, replacing the poster on the wall, we do these infographics that kind of lay out the entire intentional culture and providing some context and explanation of the why we have these things. What's the intention of it? Many organizations do an organizational video. I think that's great. The key there is really just ad hoc interviews with the team, the stories that they tell. Those become the power of how it's truly implemented, which brings us to item number 4 there, the example values-based stories. I'll share later, share an example of that, but there's power in the stories that we tell. And so keeping that front and center, collecting those examples of how your values, how your behaviors have been applied in reality is incredibly powerful. So these are just some sample outputs, standing agenda templates. So your rituals often become a part of your daily, your weekly, your monthly, yearly meetings, things of that nature. Well, how do you build your values into those rituals, that recurring cycle of meetings, so that it's, again, you're communicating in everything we do that the how matters, that these values, these behaviors differentiate the organization. And really, we probably should start with the communication plan, because it's through that communication plan, that last item here, that you lay out what are these different mechanisms. And we also add in their social media calendar. But what I'd like to do is just share with you our communication plan when it comes to, excuse me, how we communicate our culture. Don't have to overcomplicate it. This is our communication plan related to culture. Now, there are organizations that create communication plans for programs, for companies, for all sorts of different things. Keep it simple. Now, when we craft a communication plan, we typically start with the audience. You'll see the order of columns. I've made some changes here, but you typically start with assessing the audience and what are we trying to fulfill? What need are we trying to satisfy with respect to this audience? And then we define the mechanisms and the frequencies by which we do it. In this case, when I present the communication plan, I'm flipping the order saying, okay, this is our mechanism and this is how the audience it serves and what we need to satisfy this. And I'll share with you what's in our culture communication plan. So we've got move something here, bear with me a moment. We've got stand-up meetings. These are daily touch points. This is for our internal team. And how this relates to culture. What does this satisfy? One, it keeps us accountable, which is one of our right to play values. But we intentionally apply a ritual at the end of these meetings, which is all about our core value of integrity and honoring the wellness, the wholeness of each and every individual. We end every single 15 minutes a day stand-up meeting with an expression of gratitude, which is ultimately, it's so critically important in this day and age, where things don't always look great, but it's a reminder of our wholeness, of our wellness, of what is good in life. It's a clear reflection daily of our culture, of our values. Next on the list. So team meetings, in addition to these daily stand-ups, these check-ins, we have weekly team meetings. And this is dedicated time. We work on the business. We often pull out our Credo cards during these discussions and talk about, well, what would it be that our values tell us when it comes to decisions that we're making? But even more important than that, and something I encourage every organization to do when you create an intentional culture plan, is on a periodic basis, pick a behavior statement, pick a ritual, and have a discussion. We do this all the time with our team. We simply pick one and say, what does this mean in terms of application in our organization, within our team? And how are we doing relative to that application? Again, this goes back to the whole notion of this gives you the language to hold each other accountable. And we have a conversation about it without judgment. In some cases, we'll say, yeah, you know what, we're falling a little short on this one behavior statement, but it's a good thing we brought clarity to what that means and what we need to do differently going forward. That can be a 5-minute conversation as part of a weekly, monthly meeting, whatever it may be. Employee development discussions. I've got to credit our chief gardener of people, Jennifer Hughes, on this one. I mean, she's been pushing us to kind of getting outside of the annual review cycle or maybe the mid-year check-in to an ongoing basis of having discussions. And in everything we do with employee development, we put those right to play values front and center and those core values as part of those discussions. They become a critical factor that we're providing feedback and having discussion about how are we doing in the how we deliver what we deliver. So that becomes a very intentional mechanism of communicating and emphasizing the value, the importance, the significance of our values in our culture. Then we have quarterly all hands meetings. Now we've had to put a hold on some of this. We love to do this in person, get everybody together. But typically these are longer sessions that we all get together and some aspect, we're working on the business and we're bringing culture into every conversation. But at a minimum, on an annual basis, we revisit our behaviors and our rituals. Typically, I say your values are going to remain pretty sturdy. If you have to change those, you will. But generally, you may make some changes and say, yeah, this behavior isn't truly reflective of what we're trying to accomplish, or we want to change this, or we want to try out some new rituals. And we revisit our culture on an annual basis, just saying, okay, what else? We want to try something new, embrace something that reflects who we are. So those are kind of, we talked about the standing meeting agenda templates, and that's how we communicate that through the rituals of our meeting structure, those operating norms that we have. Then there are other mechanisms here that are product oriented. I've already shared with you the Credo card. That's a daily, persistent reminder of who we are and the language and our culture and how we differentiate ourselves. We all carry that with us everywhere we go. We share it freely with potential employees, with potential clients, with existing clients, for everyone. Some of you on this call, I appreciate you follow our social media. Maggie, who started this off, I mean, she's been very intentional about putting out messaging that relates to our culture and our mission and our vision on a daily basis. But at a minimum, we do these weekly blog posts that are all connected to our mission, our vision, our values, and our culture. Kristen Gauthier in our company has created a intentional culture checklist, which I'm now looking at saying, oh, this is great to be able to say, okay, this social media post, how is it addressing our mission, our vision, or some of our values and behavior statements, and where are we being consistent in the messaging that we're getting out? And then finally, I mentioned earlier this notion of a story repository, incredibly powerful. And so with that, I encourage you to create and maintain a repository of stories. And I'm going to share an example of what that looks like. We have I showed you on our Credo card, we have a core value of creativity. And one of our behavior statements is tell a story. It's worth 1,000 pictures. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, we say a story is worth 1,000 pictures. You do the math, 1,000,000 words. And this is where you really help people understand the application of your values. And we have a core value, or we have a right to play value of accountability. And a story that just happened a year ago was we were supporting one of our clients that we've had for a long time and writing an unbelievable proposal. It ended up being a $50 million proposal that we led the effort, we managed the proposal, and we helped them with pricing, technical response, past performance, everything else. It required the submission of 28 files and nearly 500 pages of documentation. And one of my colleagues on this call just did a phenomenal job leading that effort. And we were really proud of the file that, or of the proposal that we submitted. About a week after the submission of that, we discovered that we made a mistake as we were converting everything to PDF for submission. We overwrote the name of one of the other files and ended up submitting 2 copies of the same file while neglecting to submit one incredibly critical part of that proposal. Now, my colleague was devastated. And to be honest, she confessed to me, she started looking, she's like, I think I need to prepare my resume. Not sure I'm gonna have a job. Well, we look at our right to play value of accountability, and my colleague stepped up and said, I made a mistake. And I want everybody in our company to know that acknowledgement of a mistake is exactly what we want. And not once was her job at risk. And guess what? My colleague went through extensive effort to demonstrate to the government in the submission of this proposal, we provided the right version, showed them that it had not changed this since the submission date, that we had not changed that file at all. And ultimately, the government came back and said, honest mistake, we accept it, thank you very much. Our client, we went right to our client and we were accountable and we were prepared to take extreme measures to compensate our client for a mistake that we made. We held ourselves accountable. And it's an incredibly powerful story. And to say there were blood, sweat, and tears over that is an understatement. And I'm happy to report a year later, last week, we were notified our client won a $50 million contract. That's the power of stories and really reinforcing what's important here at CEEK and how we apply that value and letting everyone know that acknowledgement of a mistake is honored and we're going to make mistakes. And I don't care the significance of it. It's when you don't do that that you get in trouble. Let's see, that's the power of stories. That's what really sells your culture and differentiates your organization. One last point I want to make about communications is just don't undersell the significance and importance of branding. Everything we have done at CEEK, we are very intentional. I can tell you an extensive story about the logo of CEEK and our 7 C's model and how it builds into a ship and how you can see those 7 C's reflective of C-level leadership. And you can see what lies beneath that service or beneath the surface of C-level is a V. That's reflective of the core values of an organization beneath the surface. And everything we do has imagery about lighthouses, about taking the con, steering, taking ownership, seeking a better way, whether it's our color scheme, our templates. This is all part of the messaging. And so, you don't have to go hire that firm that charges outrageous rates. There's simple efforts that you can take, and even in an office within a federal agency, they don't have to just adopt what the agency says. Be creative, create your own templates, create your own branding. We created a logo for an office within a federal agency along with a style guide that gave them their color scheme and things of that nature. So that can all help reinforce and shape and communicate your culture as well. So with that, I want to leave you with a few thoughts to consider, as you step away from this. Ask the question at the beginning, but how do you currently communicate the intended values and behaviors and what the expectations are associated with it? Give some thought to, are you even doing anything about that? What can you do differently? Is it the intended message that you're seeking? And what can I do to more actively communicate and promote the intended culture? Look at our activity sheet, look at the slide deck, look at some of the examples here. Doesn't have to be a ton of things. Keep it simple. Keep your communication plan simple. Build it into your ritual of meetings. Really, first and foremost, establish a language that you can hold each other accountable. And then finally, with your values as a guide, what should we do and communicate in the midst of a crisis? What would our right to play values of empathy say about how I and my colleagues communicate with each other during this difficult time? What would our right to play value of accountability say? Always go back to that as a filter for how you communicate within your organization. You've seen this before. I started with this. Again, you can go out to the landing page. There's more information that you can gather. You can expand your knowledge from that. Look at some of the posts that we have out there. But most importantly, how do you apply this? I challenge you to review and assess your current communications. And if nothing else, just come up with one simple step. I don't care where you reside in the organization. Is there something that you can begin to implement today that just reflects an intentional value, an intentional behavior that you can do right now? You can take the con, you can own it. You don't have to be the head of the organization. You can be managing a team. You could do this in your family or with yourself. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. I know we're running short on time right now, so if there are any questions, I'll be happy to respond via email and get back to you. And then I hope again next week that you'll join us. We're going to tackle training and coaching the culture into the organization, coaching it into leaders within the organization. So we'll dive into that particular application. And that brings us again to a conclusion. As you see here, just want to remind everybody that there's 1 month left. We've reduced the price of Navigate Chaos. If you're a zombie in the workforce, encourage you to go out and get the book now. It's marked down from $17.99 to $7.99 and $2.99 on Kindle. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, I welcome that. So let me turn it back over to you, Maggie, if there's any closing thoughts, remarks, comments.
Hi, everybody. I have just sent the website so you can see where you can get the activity book presentation and the video recording. Please just give us a couple days for the recording. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, email us or email Steve at the email you see there. And have a great day.